Hello, Isaiahites. Welcome to week 3. I want to go over the week 3 assignments with you. So I'm going to switch over to a Word document where I cut and pasted the main assignment, which is Luke interprets Isaiah. And here you're going to answer 5 questions. Basically, the first one is study Isaiah 61, 1 through 2. In context, use your interpretive skills, but do not use a commentary yet. All right. And you are then going to summarize what you believe the message is after you have studied the passage. Then you are to turn to Luke 4, 16 through 30, where Jesus reads the Isaiah 61 passage, and he says, today this has been fulfilled in your hearing. And then you are to study it and summarize what you believe Jesus is saying. No commentary. So here you're just doing basic Bible study skills and writing what you believe it means. Now, here's what I did. I actually just cut and pasted Isaiah 61, 1 and 2 from the ESV. And then here's the Luke 4 passage where Jesus reads the Isaiah passage from the ESV, and it pretty equally lines up. You are going to notice that in the original, this phrase, he has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, is not in the Luke version. And then what is read when Jesus reads it, these words, and recovering of sight to the blind, is not in the original Isaiah passage. And I don't want you to spend, in fact, don't spend any time on that. I don't think that's what the assignment is getting at. I didn't write the assignment, but I did the assignment, okay? I think the difference in wording can be explained by the fact that there were different versions, just like we have the ESV and the NIV and the NKJ and the New King James and the Old King James. There were Dead Sea Scrolls of the Hebrew that had a phrase like opening the eyes of prisoners. The Septuagint, the Greek version, had recovery of sight to the blind. So that explains why this is in Jesus' version. And whether he was reading, I don't think he was reading from the Septuagint, but he may have been reading from the Hebrew and translating it into Aramaic, which was the common language, or into Greek. So there may be lots of different explanations why the words are not identical. But I think what the passage is leading to, or the study of the two passages is leading to, is number 3. Compare your answers in question 1 and 2, noting the differences. Now, here's really what I think the whole exercise is really getting at. So let me highlight this. How does Jesus adapt and apply the picture presented in Isaiah? In fact, a question is Jesus adapting what was originally written to him and altering its meaning either a lot or a little? Now, this gets into kind of what the Beale article is dealing with, and that is the fulfillment of Old Testament prophecy, is the fulfillment in the New Testament, let's put it this way, is it a prediction fulfillment example issue every time, or might there be typology involved? By typology, and Beale argues that there's lots of typological fulfillment. And the idea here is that sometimes there are direct prophecies, like the Messiah will be born in Bethlehem. Where is he born? In Bethlehem. But in many cases, it's more something is pointed to in the Old Testament, like the priesthood or the kings or the prophets, and something that happens in the Old Testament is fulfilled in a greater way by Jesus. Those things are types that are fulfilled by Jesus. An example of this is in Hosea. It says, "Out of Egypt I've called my son." Originally, that is referring to God leading the Israelites out of Egypt in the Exodus. But in Matthew, when the family leaves Bethlehem and flees from Herod and goes to Egypt, and then they come out of Egypt and they come back to Nazareth, Matthew quotes the Hosea passage, "Out of Egypt I've called my son," and some people have said, well, he's twisting that. Well, not if you look at what happened to the Israelites, to God's son Israel, as a type that is fulfilled in the greater son, Jesus. One happened and the other happened the first one happened typologically. I mean, it really happened in history, but it's fulfilled in a greater way in Jesus. So the question is, here in Luke 4, is Jesus taking the Isaiah passage and is he using it typologically? In other words, it had one historical meaning in Isaiah, but Jesus is applying it to himself in a typological way. Or the question is, did Isaiah originally have the Messiah in mind? So what I did, and you don't have to answer all these questions. These are just, as I did the assignment, questions that came to my mind, and hopefully they'll spur some thinking on in your mind. Was Isaiah originally writing about Jesus or someone nearer to Isaiah? All right. 2, is Jesus treating Isaiah 61 typologically or as a direct fulfillment? In other words, was he thinking of Jesus, or was he writing about either himself or some other prophet near him? Number 3, did Jesus ever set the Jews free from Roman captivity? So when it talks about freedom from slavery or captivity, is this a reference? What is Jesus referring to here? In other words, number 4, is the captivity Jesus is speaking of political captivity or spiritual captivity? Number 5, are the poor the economically poor or the poor in spirit? 6, are the blind the physically blind or the spiritually blind? 7, is Jesus altering the original meaning of Isaiah from a physical meaning to a spiritual meaning? Number 8, might Isaiah's original meaning have been spiritual? Number 9, might Isaiah's original meaning have been physical, but with a deeper spiritual meaning also intended? And then this raises some hermeneutical questions. Is it legitimate to use the New Testament to interpret the Old Testament, or must the Old Testament meaning be restricted to its unique historical setting? All right, so that's kind of the question in interpreting this. How much do we rely on the new to interpret the old versus letting the old stay in its original context? Oswald has an interesting footnote on this when you read his commentary. What are some dangers of using the New Testament to interpret the Old Testament? What are some dangers of not using the New Testament to interpret, and that should be the Old Testament? And then, so those are all questions generated from really number 3, the first question here. It then asks, also ask yourself why Luke records the synagogue event concluding in rejection and disaster, whilst, I like that word, whilst Isaiah 61 is generally so positive and full of hope. And as I thought about that, number 14 got raised. Is the negative reaction or rejection in Luke a result of Jesus quoting Isaiah, or what Jesus says after the quote? All right. And then finally, interact with the explanation in Oswalt on page, and then so make sure you read Oswalt's commentary on that chapter. Okay. Now, number 4, take a stab at another exegetical question. Why does Jesus stop reading at verse 2a? Consider that the more religious persons in his audience would have known how the verse continued. And I'm going to give you just a big old hint here. Might it have to do with the fact that Jesus is going to come twice? He came once already. He's coming back a second time, and what his main purpose was in that first versus second coming. There you go. There's a free Christmas present. And then number 5, in 2 or 3 paragraphs, and I'm going to say, let's make that 2 or 3 sentences. Okay. I want you to be concise here. In 2 or 3 sentences, explain the lesson you have learned about applying prophecy from the way Jesus/Luke developed this prophecy. In other words, what you're doing in number 5 is you are trying to concisely summarize what you've struggled with here in number 3. So there you go. That'll get you thinking. Enjoy this exercise.